constitutional carry bill going into law to diversity on college campuses. I talk one-on-one with State Representative Spencer Wetmore of House District 115 for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. South Carolina State Representative and Attorney Spencer Wetmore, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much for having me, Quintin. Always a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you are a local attorney and a Democratic state representative representing South Carolina House District 115, which now covers
James Island, Johns Island, Kiowa, Seabrook, and Folly. We did Johns Island in the last census redrawing.
Wow. What exactly do people from Johns Island need from you from a state level?
The same thing everyone else needs. And
yes, ma'am, I lost you there, but yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of quality life issues.
This thing everyone else needs. Yeah, exactly. Always traffic and flooding. That's the most important thing that everyone has.
Yes, ma'am, and I want to get back to that in a second, but let me get you to Columbia because there's a lot of issues going on right now, and I want to talk to you, obviously, about diversity on college campuses. This is coming from WCSC.
Okay.
The bill passed in the South Carolina House of Representatives on last week targeted efforts to promote diversity on college campuses. Well, let me ask you this. Where was the promotion of diversity before all of this?
Well, I think this is something that we know starts at every level, right? The federal government has grants that are conditioned upon the importance of having inclusionary programs, right? Diversity and bias training, this sort of fear factory machine has made those into such bad words. But really, we know every single one of us has implicit bias, right? I have bias, you have bias. And the most important thing is that, especially in, say, a medical field or, yes, on a college campus, that we understand the impacts of that we understand the impacts of our history, and that we educate the next generation. When it comes to a doctor, having implicit bias may affect life-saving treatment. So these programs are incredibly crucial. The federal government has recognized that from their grant programs. They understand that this is crucial to not only training and educating, the next generation of workforce, but also really making life or death decisions when it comes to fields like medicine and, so many other where split decision, if it's based in bias, may absolutely have a negative stems from. And of course, the fear factory, as I like to call it, this sort of right-wing groups that demonize very reasonable things just in the name of ginning up fear so that they can raise more money and sell more t-shirts or whatever. They have sort of demonized this word, and because so many of our Republican colleagues in the House are only worried about their next primary election, they don't have to compete in the general elections. Because of that, they're in a race to outdo themselves, to prove themselves to this far-right fear factory.
And I want to get to the other side of the story, a Republican representative, in the next interview that I do on Quintin's Close-Ups. But where exactly is implicit bias on college campuses?
Well, I think it can be anywhere, right? I think that the idea is that everyone, this is a psychological phenomenon, we know. And the idea is to say, hey, you know what, that is, the split-second judgment you make about somebody that you don't know is what that is. And so I don't know that it's on college campuses, but I do think it's incredibly important that when colleges are applying for grants, or when they are doing their hiring decisions, or when they are looking at their academic curriculum or curricula, that this is just a part of it. We're not saying it needs to be the focus, but it's a part of it, just like statistics, just like learning about world history. It's all part of the modern education system.
I want to get to that in just a second, but so far since this bill, well, let me ask you, how many schools and colleges, universities, I should say, have actually applied for diversity grants before this bill was passed?
Well, so the thing is, it's not actually, has nothing to do with diversity grants. It actually may impact just regular funding for schools. And so the even if folks are not, even if schools are not applying for any kind of diversity specific, it can affect their, it can affect everything, even just research grants. So many of those grants are tied to, there's just like a box that you check off when you do federal grant applications, right? If it's a construction project, you're checking off that you're using American-made steel. If it's a research grant for an institution, you're checking off that you have diversity and inclusion programs, because that's one of the things that we've recognized as a nation is so important.
How many colleges and universities here in South Carolina actually have diversity programs?
Well, I don't actually know the number on that. I think it's not so much about having a specific program as it is that that's one of the factors that may be considered when they make, say, a hiring decision, or as part of maybe the freshman orientation program. But I don't know that it's a specific program for any of these places. I think it's more about, just like I said, one small tiny piece of a broader either orientation or program or hiring plan, whatever it is.
Yes, ma'am. I'm so sorry about that distraction there. But let me ask you this. Well, let me ask you this: how would colleges and how many colleges and universities in South Carolina actually use diversity pledges in their college admissions?
Well, now after the United States Supreme Court has ruled, that is not an eligible factor anymore, and so now the answer is 0.
Any for job decisions?
Well, now that's I don't know, and I think colleges are all sorting through that right now. Obviously, if this bill passes the Senate, it will have an impact on that.
Now, how would colleges and universities, how many of them are actually currently following federal laws and standards with this particular bill from the House?
Well, so again, if this bill passes the Senate, it would become state law. But right now, there's nothing for them. At this point, it's only passed the House. And obviously, there's the opportunity for the Senate to amend it. But we do think they all will be impacted by the national Supreme Court, federal Supreme Court decision as to admission. So that will have the impact on everyone.
And how will that impact some of the colleges, universities here in your district?
Well, I actually don't know that I have any universities in my district. But certainly locally, we have a number of great, wonderful universities. And yeah, absolutely. Now, as a result of that Supreme Court decision, none of them will be able to use any sort of race-based criteria in their admissions process.
And that article goes on to say that supporters of the legislation say that they want to ensure merit actually guides higher education. But some students and staff have warned that their proposal could have detrimental effects. So what other effects are there right now?
Well, I don't think we really know. I do know that we've seen, legislation that everybody touted as innocuous. For example, last year when we talked about, critical race theory, that was last year's boogeyman. I think the Republican majority ended up passing a bill that it took out some of the worst language. It sort of, mollified the bill. But that still did not stop the Freedom Caucus from using that bill as a cudgel to sue the Charleston County School District. It cost the Charleston County School District, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend that suit, and they had to redo their entire curriculum that they had just implemented because the Freedom Caucus used one word from that bill as part of a lawsuit. So that's always the larger concern with these bills, is that it's going to create a cause of action that will let the Freedom Caucus then sue and make even more money for their political work.
How many colleges and universities do you think the Freedom Caucus will sue as a result of this?
We just don't know. I mean, they can find and pick up on any little thing. And even if it's not, even if they don't win in the end, it still costs the universities money to defend these lawsuits and to, sort through, it ended up, for example, the Charleston County suit ended up in a settlement, but it still had untold costs.
Wow. And let me ask you this. What's actually, as a generalization, what is actually guiding higher education today when you take away diversity and all these other issues that are currently going on?
Yeah, and I think our universities are doing an amazing job of educating the next generation. Just like with anything else, life is a pendulum, right? So it's going to swing back and forth. They're going to have different focuses over time, and I think that's a good thing. They should be responding to, is going on culturally. We should have students giving critical thought to, what's in the news and what's going on, as well as learning about history so we don't repeat it. But I think, just like I said at the beginning, these are universities trying to do their best to incorporate a broad range of principles into their general education programs.
And I want to get back to that in just a second, State Representative, but let me ask you this. If you stop diversity training based off of this bill, how much money would the state actually lose?
I don't know the dollar amount. It actually more likely will preclude them from applying for grants. So we don't know a dollar amount, but it could be millions if they lose out on research grants and all the federal funding that we need to be top-notch universities.
And how many potential state employees could just go away, go someplace else because of this?
We don't know. That's the same thing we debated with the abortion bill, right? If we start criminalizing people's everyday jobs, if we start punishing people for doing their jobs, people are not going to want to come to South Carolina. And so, again, we can't quantify it, but we know it will have an impact.
Speaking of that abortion bill, and this particular bill as well, State Representative, why not shift this bill into a referendum?
Well, in South Carolina, we have any referendum must be approved by the state legislature. In other states where you've seen it make the news, there's a certain, a percentage of voters that can force a referendum onto the ballot. Here in South Carolina, that referendum has to be approved by the legislature. And so I can't tell you what, I don't know if they would want to do a diversity, equity, inclusion ballot referendum, but I do know that they do not want to do an abortion referendum. And so Representative Stavronakis and I have introduced bills that would put that to a vote for the people, that would put the question of abortion or a woman's right to choose or make medical decisions with her family and her doctor. We have introduced legislation that would put that to a vote by the people. My guess is that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are scared of what will happen.
And well, let me go to the other side, because Tim McGinnis, from a state representative from Horry County, says, quote, "What we're trying to stop is preferential treatment based on group identity. We're trying to ensure that the playing field stays level." What evidence does the state have to say a particular group is actually getting preferential treatment?
You'd have to ask him that, but I certainly don't know that I think, I think that's probably a stretch on their part, but I'm not aware of any evidence.
Is this truly a weak bill stuffed with exemptions, especially for colleges that must comply with the accreditation purposes?
Yeah, we certainly introduced a number of amendments that, in theory, strengthened, their ability to apply for those scholarships. But whether or not you put in an exemption, A, does not necessarily still make you eligible for federal funding, and B, does not stop lawsuits based on some very small detail. Any group can come and sue now based on the language in this bill.
Oh, that language in that bill, what do you expect that to be once it's amended?
I don't know. I think whether or not the Senate, we are now a month and a half away from the end of session altogether. Right. And of course, as you know, but maybe some of your listeners and viewers may not, South Carolina has a 2-year session. And so come May 9th, any bill that has not passed both the House and the Senate does not become law and must be reintroduced in the next session. And so, if it even gets taken up, we don't know. But if it's not taken up by May 9th, it will not become law, and we'll have to start all over. Hopefully, I guess for the opponents of the bill, they would hope for that, or we would hope for that. But anything that's not taken up and passed by May 9th is not going to become law.
And if this is the case, then why does the state of South Carolina actually require employees of said state to take the DEI training?
I don't know that every agency. I think right now each agency is allowed to make their own things. But just like when we have, you have an HR department that requires any number of trainings, right? You take accounting training, you take sexual harassment training. I think these are all important pieces to make sure that you have a healthy and functional workplace.
And in what way should the state require companies that contract with the state to comply with removing DEI as a part of their bid process for all contracts?
I'd be delighted to figure out how the State House of Representatives thinks it's going to tell Volvo and Boeing and BMW to run their HR programs, but I guess they'll have to figure that out.
How would this bill actually protect free speech and treat all viewpoints equally?
You know, I don't know. We already have the First Amendment, and I think obviously if there were some major problem with people's free speech, we would have seen those lawsuits brought long ago under the First Amendment. So I don't know that they don't need a statute from the State House to give them any additional rights beyond the Constitution.
And quickly, I know you have to run, but let me jump over
okay.
to permitless law that is. South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster that is signed the bill allowing permitless handguns carrying into law. This means that adults will be able to carry loaded handguns openly with no permit of training, and adults 18 plus can legally possess guns, and that's actually can now openly carry them with no permit or prior training. Let me ask you this. As a footnote, the Bureau of Protective Services reminds the public that the passage of the constitutional carry is still illegal under the new law to carry guns in places where you couldn't before, such as schools, libraries,
or any business that posts. Yeah,
exactly right. Let me ask you this. When you talk about that particular bill, as far as, not allowing people to bring guns into the libraries and schools and whatnot, why not lift those restrictions along with this particular bill?
I guess if you were a Second Amendment purist and you believed you should be able to carry it anywhere, but I think the fact that we still have those restrictions means that we as a state recognize that there are places that are not safe to have firearms. I don't think, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone you'd be hard pressed to find anyone that didn't agree that we shouldn't have guns at schools, right? And so I think that right there is a recognition that there are some places it's just not safe. Of course, we want people to be able to have firearms to protect themselves in their homes, with their families, to go hunting. Of course, we want all of that. But the danger of this bill is that because we had to issue permits before, or because we had some procedure to do background checks, red flag checks, we were able to stop people, basically with criminal histories or with severe mental illnesses under the red flag laws from purchasing a firearm. Well, now, if we don't have these laws requiring, a reasonable suspicion to stop someone or a reason to investigate, law enforcement opposed this bill for a reason, and it's because it takes away really valuable tools they have to keep our communities safe.
Well, let me jump right into it. Does this bill expunge those who have actually been arrested or given police records for carrying weapons without a permit?
Yeah, so you can now have an unlawful carrying charge expunged. And in fact, my husband and I own our own law firm, and we do expungements all the time for clients. And I think this is an area where, I'm delighted to see us, increase our expungements, right? This is something as criminal defense attorneys, my husband and I do all the time, and it helps people to apply for jobs and all kinds of things. Expungements are incredibly important, but, I'd love to see us expunge things like, marijuana convictions. But yeah, so this bill does allow for the expungement of a previous unlawful carrying conviction. In other words, if you were convicted for carrying it in a place that now would be legal, it does allow for an expungement of that conviction. And in fact, it also offers to refund money that people have paid for previous trainings. This bill had a huge fiscal impact because we had to allocate millions of dollars to refund people's training that they'd gotten in the past. So, in my opinion, a real unfortunate step backwards for our state.
And how much has the state actually refunded each of these people?
Well, it's just whatever they paid for the training. So maybe $150, but all told, that equals millions that we had to appropriate.
Now, are there still infringements with this particular bill?
I don't know. I think certainly people will see how it plays out. This is brand new legislation that was just signed in by the governor, and so it's in effect now. And we'll see. We'll get law enforcement to weigh in a year from now, and we'll see how it's impacted us.
What reciprocity is there with this particular bill?
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I do know that, this idea of what's legal when you cross a state line is certainly confusing. Whether or not we have reciprocity, I don't know, but I do know now that we will have a lot more openness, so to speak, in terms of where you can hold a handgun than some of our neighboring states. So hopefully our South Carolina citizens will research very carefully depending on which state they're traveling to.
Since this bill has been signed into law, State Representative, how much has gun violence gone down?
I don't, like I said, it was just signed into law a couple of weeks ago, so I don't think we have any kind of meaningful statistics, and I don't think we have any idea. I don't think we'll know for at least a year. And of course, crime statistics have nothing to do with one individual law, right? It has everything to do with education and economics and hell, the weather. So I don't think we can ever trace increases or decreases in violent crime to one particular piece of legislation. We've recently just taken up the bond bill, looking at how we handle bonds, how we handle just there's so many factors that go into a statistic like violent crime.
Do you foresee the gun crime decreasing in the next 5 years because of this bill?
Well, yeah, to some extent, because we won't have as many arrests for unlawful carrying for people carrying the gun in the wrong place in the car. That's the only decrease I can envision.
Attorney State Representative Spencer Wetmore, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much, Quintin.
Thank you.